Hi, and welcome to this fifth session of the Three Course, where we're exploring the three key dimensions of the Christian faith relating to the Creator, God as Father, making sense of who Jesus Christ is, and experiencing the dynamic power of the Holy Spirit. And we're considering the second of those topics, understanding the identity, the person, the role of Jesus, by looking at three further themes relating to him. Jesus' life, his death, and his resurrection. Now, in the last session, we began to just scratch the surface, really, of thinking about Jesus' life. And now in this session, we will reflect on, or begin to reflect on, the significance and meaning of his death. It's often observed that Jesus' death holds a place of importance in the Christian faith, unlike anything else. Almost a third of the Gospels are devoted to recording the events leading up to and surrounding Jesus' crucifixion. A third. As I think through all the biographies that I've ever read, even those of people who've perhaps died in famous or infamous circumstances, people like Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr., at best, those biographies maybe devote 10% of their content to dealing with the individual's death. It's generally recognized that for most of us, our primary purpose is fulfilled in life rather than in death. But for Jesus, despite the remarkable significance of his life and his teaching and his character, that assumption is questioned. As one biblical commentator put it, the Gospels, those biographical accounts of Jesus that we have in the Bible, appear to be essentially the chronicle of Jesus' final week of life and his death, with lengthy introductions. Well, whether you agree with that or not, I think we can confidently say that the cross, which was the means of Jesus' death, is at the heart of the story about him. If an alien visited Earth and observed the Christian church, they would quickly deduce that the cross is central to everything. Apart from the many crosses adorning our church buildings, at the heart of Christian worship is communion, centered on bread and wine, which symbolize Jesus' broken body and spilt blood, images of his crucifixion, which Jesus predicted would be used to remember his death even before the event took place. Crosses are worn, not just by priests and nuns and ministers, but also by many non-professional people of Christian persuasion, and even by a lot of people who wouldn't consider themselves to be practicing Christians. And I think we often miss the irony of people wearing a cross. I mean, this popular piece of jewelry was actually an ancient instrument of pain and suffering and torture and death. A mini guillotine or electric chair worn around the neck in a decorative fashion would raise many eyebrows. But a cross bears little difference from these in its essential nature. From eyewitness observation, the ancient Roman philosopher Cicero describes for us, he captures in text a crucifixion, describing it as one of the most hideous and cruel tortures. So let me read to you his words. He says, "Prior to crucifixion, prisoners are often flogged with 4 or 5 thongs of leather interwoven with pieces of sharp, jagged bone and lead. The flesh of the victims was flayed down to the bone, muscles and ligaments torn, internal organs damaged. The crucifixion itself involved 6-inch nails driven through the lower forearms and heels, leaving the victim hanging in unbearable heat, unquenchable thirst, exposed to the ridicule of the crowd. In Jesus' case, he hung there in unbearable pain for 6 hours while his life slowly drained away." The words agony and perhaps shame best describe the experience. So why would Jesus' followers have placed so much emphasis on his death if it was such an awful thing? When the Apostle Paul went to Corinth, he summarized his mission with the words, "I resolved to know nothing while I was amongst you except Jesus Christ and him crucified," he says in 1 Corinthians 2:2. So why so important? Well, simply because the first Christians believed that what appeared to be a crushing blow actually accomplished something very special and important. They believed that Jesus' death was not arbitrary or accidental, but intentional. Based on Jesus' teaching and then what subsequently happened, they believed that Jesus chose to die and that in his death accomplished something that could be achieved in no other way. So what do they believe Jesus' death achieved? Well, there are many things, to be sure, and I've really only got time to reflect on perhaps three of the more common ideas. But the first thing is that they believed that Jesus' death on the cross was a revelation of God's love. When I was a school student, one of the texts for religious education was Ernest Gordon's Miracle on the River Kwai. In the Second World War, Scottish prisoners of war forced by their Japanese captors to labour on the Burmese railroad in the thick and unbearably humid Thai jungle had degenerated into despairing and desperate circumstances. But one afternoon, something happened which transformed their lives. At the end of a workday, a shovel went missing. The Japanese officer in charge became enraged. He demanded that the missing shovel be produced, or else. When nobody in the squadron budged, the officer got out his gun and threatened to kill them all the prisoners on the spot. It was obvious that he meant what he said. And as he grabbed his gun and grabbed the nearest prisoner and held the gun to the man's head, about to kill him, another soldier stepped calmly forward and claimed responsibility for the missing shovel. Enraged by the man's calm demeanour, the officer viciously clubbed him to death with the butt of his rifle. And when it was over, the survivors picked up the man's bloody corpse and carried it back to camp, where the tools were checked again. But this time there was no shovel missing. Indeed, there had been a miscount. And the word spread like wildfire through the whole camp. An innocent man had been willing to die to save everybody else. The incident had a profound effect. Not only did the action lay bare the evil and depraved heart of the captors, but meeting fear and violence with sacrifice and love began an infectious transformation amongst the prisoners. The men began to care for each other in a way they hadn't before. For example, sacrificing food to give to the weakest and the sickest. When the victorious allies swept into the camp, the survivors, just human skeletons by this stage, lined up in front of their captors, and instead of attacking them, insisted there must be no more hatred, there must be no more killing. What we need now, they said, is forgiveness. In the horror of a single brutal death, genuine and courageous love was revealed. Sacrificial love has transforming power. That's what the world desperately needs. And the cross of Jesus Christ reveals or even proclaims God's love for us. Greater love has no one than this, that they lay down their life for their friends, it says in John chapter 15. Or in John chapter 3, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. But God demonstrates his own love for us, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Romans 5. The English theologian Michael Lloyd points out that the cross can only be a demonstration of God's love if it achieves something. You know, if a father runs into a burning building in order to rescue his child, that's a profound demonstration of love. But if a father just jumps off a high building in front of his child shouting, "Look how much I love you," that would demonstrate just waste and folly and produce confusion. Only if there is a rescue being attempted and preferably accomplished can there be a meaningful demonstration of love. Which leads us to the second way in which the cross is understood. The cross of Christ was also not just a revelation of God's love, but also the payment of a ransom. Jesus said, "The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." Now, without pressing the analogy too far and getting all wound up or bogged down in trying to figure out, to whom is this ransom being paid and what exactly are the mechanics of how and when the payment took place, I find William Barclay's comment about that passage very helpful. He says, and I quote, "Jesus came to give his life as a ransom for many." What does that mean? Well, it means quite simply this. People are in the grip of a power of evil that they cannot break. Sinful attitudes and actions drag them down, separate them from God, wreck life for themselves, for the world around them, and for God himself. A ransom is something paid or given to liberate people from a situation from which they cannot liberate themselves. This comment reminds me of a statement that a friend of mine made to me. We were reflecting on the way our expectations of life had changed. And he said, when I was 18, I was ready to change the world. Now that I'm 40, I realise I'm flat out just controlling myself. And there is this sense in which we wear invisible chains that keep us constrained and limited, living small lives that reduce our potential. Jesus paid a ransom that frees us, that breaks those chains. Jesus said, "I've come that you might have life, life in all its fullness." Paul said in Galatians, it's for freedom that Christ has set us free. Another similar image used to describe this idea comes from the law courts of the ancient world, commonly used in the Bible to describe the result of Jesus' death is the word justification. Paul says that through Christ's death we have been justified in God's sight. Now this is a legal term and it simply means to be acquitted. In the Alpha course, Nicky Gumbel uses a vivid illustration that I want to share with you. Two people go through school and university together as best friends. They develop a very close relationship. Life goes on, however, and they end up going their different ways. They lose contact. One goes on to become a judge, whilst the other spirals into a life of crime. And one day, the criminal appears before the judge. He's committed a crime to which he pleads guilty. The judge recognises his old friend and now faces a dilemma. He's a judge, so he has to act justly. He can't just simply let the man off. On the other hand, they had been best friends and he doesn't want to punish the man. He also knows that his friend doesn't have the means to pay. And so the judge announces that he would fine the man the correct penalty for the offence. Justice must be served. But then he takes off his gown and his wig. He steps down from the bench, walks around to where his astonished friend stands and writes a cheque for the amount of the fine. By absorbing the cost of the crime himself, he was able to show both justice and mercy to his friend in the same action. This is an illustration of what God has done for us. It says in Romans 3, God presented Jesus Christ as a sacrifice of atonement through the shedding of his blood, so as to be both just and the one who justifies those who have faith in Jesus. As someone has said, Jesus came to pay a debt he didn't owe because we owed a debt that we couldn't pay. So the cross was a revelation of God's love, a ransom also paid on our behalf, and thirdly, it's also the restoration of a broken relationship. The American minister Craig Groeschel says, as a pastor, I've discovered that people are slowly dying in a secret tomb of shame. Several years ago, Groeschel's church was created a website called www.mysecret.com where people could anonymously confess to anything that they had done online and others would pray for them. Groeschel reflects on the gut-wrenchingly honest confessions that came in, illustrating the lies of shame in the shame cycle that hurting people believe and in which they are enslaved. What Groeschel is saying is that there's something stopping us from really relating to ourselves and to each other and to God as well. We all know the impact that various types of offences play in harming our relationships. I mean, if you have ever had someone gossip about you or lie to you or steal from you or wound you with their words, that inevitably hurts your relationship with them. These actions create distance and enmity. Relationship is broken. The same is true with us and God. Those things that we do and say and think that hurt others or diminish ourselves also offend God. They create distance between us. This is why forgiveness features so prominently in the work of the church. The humanist and atheist Margherita Lasky once confided, "What I envy most about you Christians," she said, "is your forgiveness. I have nobody to forgive me." The famous psychiatrist Karl Menninger once said that if he could convince the patients in psychiatric hospitals that their sins are forgiven, he thinks 75% of them could probably walk out and go home the next day. When Jesus died, the curtain in the Jewish temple, we're told, was torn in two from top to bottom. Now, this is a very powerful image. It's a remarkable metaphor. The curtain was this enormous thick fabric which separated the Holy of Holies in the temple, which is believed to be the place where the presence of God dwelt, from the other spaces in the temple available to people. A torn curtain symbolizes the removing of that which separates a holy and good and perfect God from unholy people. It implies an opening of the way so that people, ordinary people, can enter into relationship with God with a sense of immediacy and intimacy. The fact that the curtain was torn, we're told, from top to bottom, implies divine initiative. Now, as the first Christians experienced God's forgiveness and this sense of reconnection or reconciliation with God through a proclamation of the cross, their lives were changed. Their prison walls crumbled and they began to live like no one had ever lived before on planet Earth. That same message of forgiveness and transformation can be ours as well if we will accept the invitation and the embrace that the cross offers. The Apostle Peter says, Christ died for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous. Why? To bring you to God. Victor Hugo tells a classic tale of forgiveness in his sprawling novel, which you may have seen as a musical, Les Miserables. It tells the story of Jean Valjean, a French prisoner hounded and ultimately transformed by forgiveness, sentenced to a term of 19 years for hard labour for the crime of stealing bread. Jean Valjean gradually hardens into a tough convict. No one could beat him in a fist fight. No one could break his will. At last, Valjean earns his release. He does his time. But convicts in those days had to carry identity cards, and no innkeeper would let a dangerous felon spend the night under his roof. For 4 days, Valjean wanders the city streets seeking shelter against the weather until finally an aging bishop shows kindness to him. And that night, Valjean lay still in an overly comfortable bed in the bishop's house until the bishop and his sister drifted off to sleep. He then rose from his bed, rummaged through the cupboard for the family silver, and crept off into the darkness. The next morning, 3 policemen knock on the bishop's door with Valjean in tow. They had caught the convict in flight with the expensive silver and were ready to put the scoundrel in chains for life. The bishop responds in a way that no one expects, especially Jean Valjean. "So here you are," he cries. "I'm delighted to see you again. Had you forgotten that I also gave you the silver candlesticks? They're, like the other pieces, part of my gift and worth a good 200 francs. Did you forget to take them?" he said. Valjean was no thief, the bishop assured the gendarme, the police. The silver was my gift to him. And when the gendarme withdraw, finally, scratching their heads, a little suspicious, the bishop did give the candlesticks to his guest, who by now was just speechless and trembling. Don't ever forget, said the bishop, that you have promised me to use this money, to make yourself an honest man. See, the power of the bishop's forgiveness and acceptance and trust, defying every human instinct for revenge, changed Jean Valjean's life forever. A naked encounter with forgiveness melted the hardness of his troubled soul. He kept the candlesticks as a precious memento of the bishop's kindness and committed himself to then helping others for the rest of his life in the same way that he had been helped. The bishop's forgiveness is a parable of God's forgiveness, grace shown to those who don't deserve it. While we lived in a way that displeased him, God showed his undeserving love by sending his Son on our behalf to make us free and to give us life through his death. That's a paraphrase from a verse out of the book of Romans, but it summarizes for us the essence of God's forgiveness, won for us by Christ through his death. Many years ago, I was driving to Sydney with a friend, and we'd both quite recently become Christians. This was a long time ago. So we decided to pray that God would create the circumstances where we could pick up a hitchhiker, and that the hitchhiker, we prayed, would initiate a conversation about God. See, we'd both found something new and exciting in our faith, and we wanted to share that with somebody else back in the days when it wasn't illegal to pick up hitchhikers, and far more safe to do so than it probably is today. Anyway, 10 kilometres or so after we prayed this prayer, we stopped to pick up a guy on the side of the road who was, thumbing a ride. He no sooner got into the back of the car, and he says, just as we're pulling away from the curb, "Don't tell me you guys are Christians." My friend Darren and I looked at each other, stunned that our prayer had been answered so dramatically, and said to him, "What made you ask that? How did you know we're Christians?" He said, "Oh, there's a Bible on the floor in the back seat here." And thus began many hours of conversation about God. This guy had a number of friends who were Christians, who were encouraging him to explore the faith, and said that his friends were praying for him, and since they started praying, he just kept running into people who were Christians. But I vividly remember at one point my friend Darren asked him very gently, "So what is it that's stopping you from believing in Jesus?" And I'll never forget his answer. He said, there'd be no point in me becoming a Christian because God would never be able to forgive me for the things that I've done. So many people think that. God might be forgiving, he might even forgive others. But not me. Not if you knew what I've done. Not if you knew what I'm really like. But if we think that way, we have totally misunderstood the message of the cross. C.S. Lewis once walked into an interfaith conference at Oxford University. 20 or so scholars were discussing over several days the differences between Christianity and other world religions. Lewis listened for a little while and then was asked by one of the participants what he thought the difference was between the Christian faith and other religions. And he succinctly, and I think quite brilliantly, replied, "Well, I think I can tell you the difference in 2 words. Do and done." See, other religions are about what you have to do in order to get to heaven or earn God's favour or accomplish the goal of the religion. Christianity is about what God has done for us to allow us to receive his forgiveness and acceptance. It's not that we please God with our good lives and then he accepts us. Rather, he forgives and accepts us first based on what Jesus has done for us, and then he invites us to live into the reality of his love and his forgiveness and his acceptance, being transformed by that, becoming new people as we do that. So the cross was a revelation of God's love, a ransom paid on our behalf, the restoration of a broken relationship through the offer of forgiveness. These are just 3 of the meanings of Jesus' death. You can see why Jesus' first followers called the message about Jesus, including the message about his death, good news. So that concludes this 5th session of the 3 course in which we have explored the meaning of Jesus' death, at least to some degree. Well, we're over halfway now through the whole of the 3 course, and there's still so much good news to come. So I hope you can join us for that in the next session as we think a little bit about Jesus' resurrection. But before you do that, you might like to reflect on the questions that will shortly appear on the screen.